I live in southwest London. London itself is kind of interesting because you haven't got kind of really huge pockets of areas that are really wealthy and ones that are really poor. You have an area that's a total mixture, like one street you'll have is a really rich street, the next street you'll have is a really poor street. That's the great thing about London. You kind of need that diversity, and that's the only way, if you integrate people from different social backgrounds, that's the only way you're going to help people to move out of that if they want to. We definitely have that kind of tradition of lower working class, middle class, upper class, and even those phrases themselves are used on the news to kind of to define things and to talk about groups of people. And I mean, as somebody who I suppose would be categorized as middle class, it kind of that's such a huge bracket. It's such a huge bracket, and I find personally it becomes totally meaningless when politicians and news broadcasters start using these phrases. They're not talking about particular groups of people, they're talking about attitudes, and they're talking about places that people live, and that's the problem. When you're in a kind of an economic class, it then becomes like that's your attitude and you're kind of categorized in that way. We have a lot of stereotyping about things like that. There's like this whole idea of the word chav. It's a derogatory term that is used so much, and it's now become institutionalized as a sort of a bracket and a label for people. And I suppose even if people use that in a kind of a jokey way, it's self-perpetuating, I think. And that's the problem. There definitely is a very rigid sort of almost unconscious class structure. The government have set out this kind of plan of 4 or 5 years, cutting the deficit. As far as I can see it, their main goal is get the deficit down, no matter what, just so we can say this when the next election comes around. Vote for us because we're not in debt anymore, or we're not in that much debt anymore. It's the other guys that got us in debt, because that's all the rhetoric. That's the rhetoric they keep on using. It's the opposition, it's their fault, we're in this mess. The way they're going about that is by taking huge chunks out of the 3 fundamental foundations of society, which is education, welfare, and healthcare. I mean, I'm a student, so I could talk for hours and hours and complain for hours and hours about how much they have changed education and higher education and the effect it's going to have on me and the effect it's certainly going to have on friends of mine who are younger. You know, they've raising tuition fees, tripling tuition fees. They're trying to introduce an element of privatization into our healthcare system. If any Briton is proud about anything, the most unpatriotic person in Britain will still be proud that we have a socialised healthcare system. And if anybody tries to touch that in any way, if anybody tries to change that in any way, there is uproar, and there has been. To me, we may have the deficit down in 5 years, but at the expense of society as we know it. I love the fact that Obama has changed this special relationship to a central relationship. The fact that there is a distance drawn there, and it becomes much more about practicality and being pragmatic in terms of, you know, the UK and the US working together in the world. People are a lot more comfortable with that, because the thing that we hated was this whole idea that the Britain was inferior to the US, who were the masters and who were doing everything, and Tony Blair was sort of going along with that. And now we have more of a sort of a close but distant relationship, which I think is healthier, and people see that as healthier.